In the fury of a snowstorm, one cowboy is about to face more than the freezing winds. When he stumbles across a stranger alone, helpless, and on the edge of death, he does what any man would. He fights through the storm to save her. But what he finds beneath the surface of this desperate rescue shatters everything he thought he knew. What happens when the cowboy realizes the woman he saved is carrying his child and a future he never imagined? Find out what happens next. Watch the full story and follow BigBites and Brews for more Wild West stories.
The storm had raged for hours when Matt found her, a stranger, half dead from the bitter cold, clinging to the remnants of life. What he didn't know, as he pulled her from the snow and into his cabin, was that her secret would unravel the very future he thought he'd lost. The blizzard howled through the Wyoming mountains like a wild animal, its icy breath seeping through every crack in the log cabin. Matt Donovan had been on his way home when he saw her. Slumped against the snowbank, her pale face almost lost in the drifting white. He'd heard the tales of the storm's fury, but had never witnessed it firsthand. Not like this. It was more than a storm. It was a reckoning. Yet in the middle of this chaos, he'd found her. Her dark hair wet and plastered to her cold skin, her breath shallow and rapid. The kind of breath you didn't want to hear from someone who wasn't long for this world. "Help!" she gasped, barely audible over the howling winds. "Please!" Matt's heart clenched as he hoisted her into his arms, muttering a curse under his breath. She weighed nothing, like a whisper in his arms, and yet he felt the gravity of her presence pulling him in with an urgency he couldn't shake. Every second counted, but it felt like time itself was against them. By the time they reached the warmth of the cabin, she was barely conscious, her skin cold as death. He laid her on the small bed by the fire and set about the tasks he knew would save her life, making sure the flames in the hearth burned bright, removing her soaked clothes and wrapping her in blankets, rubbing warmth back into her limbs. It wasn't long before she stirred, her eyelids flickering open. Her dark eyes met his, filled with something, a mixture of confusion and fear, maybe even something deeper. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracked but determined. "Matt Donovan, and you're safe now." Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for a way out. Where am I?" "Wyoming, in my cabin. You're lucky I found you out there." She winced, clutching her abdomen. "You're hurt?" She shook her head, her fingers trembling as she touched her belly. "No, I'm fine." But Matt knew better. Something wasn't right. It took days for her to recover, though the mystery surrounding her only deepened as time went on. The woman, Avery Westbrook, had no memory of how she'd come to be lost in the blizzard. She spoke of a life in the city, of running from someone, and of secrets she refused to reveal. As the storm raged on outside, Matt worked on the ranch, his mind never straying far from Avery. She was beautiful. That much was clear, but it was something deeper that drew him to her. He couldn't place it, but something about her felt like fate. A fate he wasn't sure he was ready for. Finally, when the storm had cleared and the skies above the mountains shone bright and blue, Avery seemed stronger, though still distant. They spent hours sitting in front of the fire, exchanging stories of the lives they'd left behind. He learned she had come from a wealthy family in the East, but had been running from a past that now seemed to haunt her every move. "I was looking for a place to start over," she confessed one evening, her gaze locked on the flames. "But I didn't expect to be found. Not like this." "Why Wyoming?" Matt asked quietly. "You could have gone anywhere." Her eyes turned to him, and there was something in her look, something raw, something that made him think she wasn't just escaping. She was hiding. "It's the only place I knew," she said softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "The only place I could find peace." But it wasn't peace she found here. It was him. Weeks passed, and Avery's health continued to improve, but Matt couldn't shake the feeling that her past was catching up to her. One night, just as the first snowflakes of another storm began to fall, she came to him, trembling. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice small but firm. Matt set down the leather strap he'd been working with, his attention fully on her. "What is it?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Avery's hands clutched the hem of her woolen dress, her fingers white from the pressure. She looked down, then back up at him. I'm carrying a child," she whispered. The words hit him like a freight train. His breath caught in his throat as he stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say. "Whose?" he managed, though he already had a sinking feeling in his gut. I don't know," she whispered. "I was with a man I thought I could trust, but he betrayed me. He sold me out. I couldn't stay there, Matt. I couldn't go back to the life I had before." Matt's chest tightened. His world spun for a moment. The woman he had found in the snow, the woman whose life he had saved, was carrying someone else's child. But then, as he stared into her frightened eyes, something stirred inside him. "I'll take care of you," he said, his voice calm, steady. "I'll help you." Avery shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand. You can't. It's complicated." In the weeks that followed, Avery and Matt's relationship evolved in ways neither could have anticipated. With the storm season coming to an end and the ranch slowly returning to its usual rhythm, Matt found himself inexplicably drawn to her, despite the chaos she carried with her. And then one morning, as Avery rested her hand over her growing belly, Matt saw the truth in her eyes. This child, whether his or not, was meant to be part of their story. But the road ahead wasn't easy. Secrets from her past would return, testing both their bond and their ability to trust each other. The man who had betrayed her, the man who had set her on this path, would stop at nothing to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Matt had always been a man of few words, but as the days wore on and Avery's belly swelled with the life growing inside of her, Matt found his mind constantly wandering. He had never imagined this life for himself, a rancher, a cowboy, and certainly not a man who would one day be a father. But here he was, preparing to face something far more challenging than anything he had ever encountered on the open trail. When Avery's labor finally began, Matt was there, every step of the way. The wind howled outside, the storm's fury rattling the cabin's thin walls, but inside, everything seemed to slow, each breath, each moment, thick with the weight of what was happening. Avery clutched Matt's hand, her knuckles white with tension, her eyes locked on his, and for a moment, he could see the walls she had built around herself start to crack, just enough for him to glimpse the fear, the guilt, the pain she was carrying. She was about to give birth to his son, but it wasn't just the child she was afraid of. It was the past. "Matt," she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can do this." "Hey," Matt said softly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "You're stronger than you know. You've already made it this far." Avery's breath caught in her throat as another wave of pain crashed over her. She squeezed his hand tighter, a silent plea for support. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He was here, and he wasn't going anywhere. "I'll be right here," he promised. "Every step of the way." Avery's lips parted as if she wanted to say something more, but the moment passed. A gasp escaped her as the next contraction hit, and she focused all her energy on breathing through it. Matt stayed close, watching her with a fierce, protective determination. She wasn't alone anymore. Not now. Not ever. When the storm finally subsided, the cabin was quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic breathing of mother and child, the steady warmth of their little family growing in the stillness of the night. Matt held Caleb in his arms, the tiny bundle swaddled carefully against his chest. The baby was a perfect little miracle. His son, with his tiny fingers and the softest shock of dark hair. Matt's chest swelled with pride, and for a brief moment, the world outside the cabin disappeared. Avery, exhausted but radiant, watched him with a soft smile, her eyes filled with love. "Look at him," she whispered. "He's perfect." "He is," Matt agreed, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." Avery smiled, her exhaustion briefly forgotten as she met his gaze. "You're a good man, Matt Donovan. I don't deserve you." Matt shook his head, his heart hammering. "You deserve everything, Avery. Everything." But even as he said the words, his mind raced with the questions he hadn't asked. The things about her past she still hadn't shared. He couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb wasn't the only thing Avery was hiding. The next day, after the exhaustion of childbirth had settled into a dull ache in Avery's body, Matt stepped outside to check on the cattle. He needed to clear his head, get a grip on his emotions. The ranch was quiet, peaceful. But as he walked toward the barn, a familiar figure emerged from the tree line, cutting a dark silhouette against the fading daylight. It was a man on horseback, tall, with a commanding presence. As the figure drew closer, Matt's heart sank. The man was Avery's brother, Charles Westbrook. "You must be Matt Donovan," the man called out in a voice that carried on the wind. "I'm Charles Westbrook, Avery's brother." Matt's jaw tightened. The man's words had the weight of authority behind them. And it wasn't just his tone, it was the way he carried himself, as though the land itself belonged to him. "Don't know why you're here," Matt said, keeping his voice calm but with an edge. "Avery doesn't need anything from you." Charles dismounted, taking a few steps forward. His face was cold, calculating. "Is that right? She's my sister. I've come to make sure she's all right." Matt wasn't fooled. He knew the kind of man Charles Westbrook was. He could see it in his eyes. Avery had run from this man for a reason. "Your sister's fine," Matt said, stepping forward, not backing down. "Now you've got no business here. I'd suggest you leave." Charles didn't seem threatened, only amused. He eyed Matt, sizing him up. "You don't know the first thing about Avery, do you?" Matt's hands curled into fists. "I know enough." The tension was thick, heavy. Matt could feel the storm starting to churn again, not the one outside, but the one inside him, a growing fury that he couldn't keep contained much longer. "Just so you know, I'm not leaving without her," Charles added, his voice darkening. "And if you think I'll just turn around and ride away, you're sorely mistaken." Matt's pulse quickened. His heart raced, and a dangerous quiet fell over him as he realized that this wasn't just about Avery's past. This was about control, about power, and Charles Westbrook wasn't going to stop until he took back what he believed was his. "I don't know what you think you're doing here," Matt said, his voice cold as steel. "But I'm not afraid of you." Charles's smile was slow, almost predatory. "You should be." As the words left his mouth, Matt moved fast, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his side. But Charles was already backing away, his smile never faltering. "You're making a mistake, Donovan," Charles said, his voice low. "But I'll let you have your little dream. It won't last." With that, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off, leaving Matt standing alone in the cold silence. Later that evening, after Caleb had fallen into a peaceful sleep, Avery sat in the rocking chair by the fire, staring into the flames. The cabin was quiet, save for the crackle of burning wood. Matt stood in the doorway watching her. He could see the weight of everything she had been holding inside her, the secrets, the guilt, the pain, written clearly on her face. He approached her slowly, sitting down beside her. "Avery," he said, his voice softer now. "We need to talk." Avery's eyes welled up with tears, and she let out a shaky breath. I didn't want you to find out. I didn't want you to see the man I left behind. But now," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Her shoulders shook with a quiet sob. Matt reached for her hand, his heart breaking for her in ways he never thought possible. "You don't have to hide from me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Avery turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Charles, he's not just my brother. He's a dangerous man. He won't stop until he has me back. And now, he's coming for us." Matt's grip tightened around her hand. "Not if I can help it." She shook her head. "Matt, you don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of." "I don't care what he's capable of," Matt said, his voice low and full of conviction. "He'll never touch you. Not while I'm here." As night fell, the ranch stood in quiet defiance against the darkness that threatened to swallow it whole. The fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The scent of burning wood filled the air, but no amount of warmth could chase away the storm brewing inside Matt's chest. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but in the cabin, it was the tension in the air that gripped his heart. Charles Westbrook was not going to win. Not this time. Matt's jaw clenched as he stared into the flames, the embers reflecting in his steely eyes. His hands, rough from years of hard work, balled into fists at his sides. He had made a vow to Avery, to their son, to their future. He would protect them no matter the cost. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. Avery, her face pale but resolute, appeared in the doorway. She had been silent for the last hour, but her presence now was a quiet but steady strength. She had always been the heart of the ranch, and Matt knew she had been carrying her own storm since Charles's arrival. "Matt," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "You're not going to do something foolish, are you?" Matt turned, meeting her eyes. The fear he saw there only deepened his resolve. He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his rough hands. He could feel the pulse beneath her skin, the same rhythm that had beat within him the moment he first laid eyes on her. That love was his anchor. It always had been. "No," he said, his voice steady, though the fire still raged within him. "I'm not going to do anything foolish. But I can't let him take everything we've built." Avery sighed, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had never wanted to return to that life, to the man who had once controlled her every move, her every thought. But Charles Westbrook wasn't a man who took no for an answer. "He won't stop," she said softly, her fingers brushing against Matt's chest. "You know that, don't you? He'll never stop until he's taken what's ours." Matt's heart clenched at the sadness in her voice. He hated that this was the reality they were living, that her past continued to cast a shadow over their future. But he had made a promise when he pulled her from the wreckage of that life all those months ago. He wouldn't let her go back, and he wouldn't let anyone hurt her or their son. "I won't let him win," Matt said, his voice a low growl of determination. "Not now. Not ever." Avery's eyes searched his, knowing the fight that lived within him. She had seen it before, the quiet fury that burned deep, the kind of fury that could move mountains when necessary. "I know," she said, her voice a whisper of both love and fear. "But Matt, I don't want to lose you. Not like this." He kissed her then, soft at first, but deepened as the weight of her words settled between them. When they broke apart, Matt held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, a sharp contrast to the cold night air creeping through the cabin. "I'll be careful, Avery, but I'll also be ready." He paused, searching her eyes for the strength he knew was there. "You've always been strong. You've always fought for this family. Now it's my turn to fight for you." Avery nodded, her lips trembling as she finally allowed herself to lean into him. "I'll stand by you. I always have." Matt kissed her forehead gently and turned toward the door. He could feel it now, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had always known that protecting what mattered most, Avery, their son, this land, would come with sacrifices. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of Charles Westbrook or anyone else who dared challenge the life he had made with her. "I'll take care of it," Matt said, his voice hardening with resolve. "You stay here with Jameson. You're not getting caught in the middle of this." Avery's hand fell to her belly instinctively, a silent reminder of the fragile new life they were building together. "You're right," she said quietly, stepping back and crossing her arms protectively. "But promise me one thing, Matt. Come back to us." Matt met her gaze, his heart heavy with the weight of her words, but filled with a love that made the promise easier to make. He nodded once, firm and resolute. "I will." The night was cold, the wind biting as Matt stepped outside, the quiet hum of the ranch now replaced by the crisp silence that accompanied a storm just before it broke. The snow was beginning to fall, the first flurry of winter dusting the land with a soft, cold blanket. He mounted his horse, the animal's breath puffing in the cold air, and rode toward the barn where he kept his rifle. He had a plan, and while he hoped it wouldn't come to violence, he knew it was a very real possibility. His fingers tightened around the reins as he approached the barn, his gaze scanning the land ahead of him. Somewhere out there, Charles was waiting, plotting. But Matt wasn't about to let him take another step onto the land that was now his, Avery's, and their sons. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, but Matt didn't flinch. He was a man who had faced worse. He had faced loss, betrayal, and pain, and come through it all stronger. This was just another battle in the war he had already won, one that would secure their future. As he reached the barn and secured his rifle, a sudden noise from the shadows caught his attention. His hand immediately went to the revolver at his side. He didn't need to look to know who it was. "You're going to kill him, aren't you?" The voice was gruff, familiar, and tinged with concern. Matt didn't turn around. "I'm going to protect what's mine." The man stepped into the moonlight, revealing himself as Frank, the ranch hand who had been with him for years. Frank had seen it all, Matt's rise from a lone cowboy to a ranch owner with a family to protect. Frank's weathered face softened, his eyes flicking to Matt's rifle before locking on his friend's gaze. "You don't have to do this alone, Matt. We're with you." Matt nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "I know you are, and I appreciate it, but this is something I need to finish." Frank was quiet for a moment, looking back at the distant trees. "You think he's gonna come for you tonight?" Matt didn't hesitate. "He's been planning it for too long, and I'm not waiting for him to make the first move." Frank gave him a curt nod, turning his gaze back to the dark horizon. "Then we're ready. But remember, you don't have to be a hero tonight. You just need to come back." With that, Matt mounted his horse again, the rifle securely in place. The ranch was quiet, too quiet, and it felt like the calm before a storm. This was it, the moment where everything changed, and he would be damned if Charles Westbrook would ever take another thing from him. Matt rode off into the snowstorm, the night swallowing him whole. But he didn't feel alone. Not anymore. The first sign of trouble came not in the form of a bullet or a shout in the dark, but the cold realization that something was wrong. The horses were spooked. Matt pulled his horse to a stop, his hand going to his rifle, eyes scanning the trees ahead. His instincts screamed at him, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as the sound of hooves echoed across the ridge. Charles wasn't alone. The wind howled, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves. Matt's heart pounded in his chest as he strained to listen, his senses sharpened by years of living with danger. The horses had been calm just moments before, but now they were skittish, stomping their hooves, tossing their heads in agitation. Matt reached for the reins of his horse, steadying the animal as he listened intently. The sound was growing louder, echoing through the dark, cold night. Charles Westbrook wasn't coming alone. Whoever he had with him was riding hard, determined to finish this. The sudden realization that they weren't alone on the ridge sent a wave of urgency through Matt. He spurred his horse forward, moving toward the tree line where the horses had been spooked. His rifle was ready in his hands as he slowed the horse to a careful trot. The snow had begun to fall heavily now, obscuring his view, but his eyes were trained on the shadows ahead. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, each second stretching out longer than the last. And then he saw them. A group of riders emerged from the swirling snow, their figures barely visible against the dark backdrop of the trees. At the lead was Charles Westbrook, his face hard as stone, his cold eyes glinting with malevolent satisfaction. Behind him, a few rough-looking men followed. Men Matt didn't recognize, but they were all here for one reason: to take what wasn't theirs. Matt's lips pressed into a tight line. He wasn't about to let that happen. He dismounted quickly, moving silently behind a cluster of pines, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes never left Westbrook, watching as the men reined their horses to a stop at the edge of the ridge, just out of sight. The wind picked up again, the storm nearly deafening now, but Matt's focus never wavered. He had to make this count. Avery's heart raced as she stood by the fire, her thoughts with Matt as he rode out into the storm. She had been trying to stay calm, but every minute that passed felt like a year. Charles Westbrook was out there, and the fear gnawing at her insides was almost unbearable. She wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze flicking toward the door as if she could will Matt's safe return. She hated feeling so helpless, trapped in the house while he risked everything to protect them. She knew he would fight, knew he wouldn't let anything stand in his way, but the thought of losing him twisted her gut. And then, as if the storm had not yet delivered its full fury, the door flew open, cutting through her thoughts like a sharp blade. Frank stepped inside, his face grim and weathered from the wind, his eyes dark with worry. "They're out there," he said quietly, closing the door behind him and looking over his shoulder as though making sure no one was following. Avery's heart skipped a beat. She stood frozen for a moment, the cold realization sinking in. "Westbrook?" Frank nodded. "With a crew. He's not coming just to scare Matt, Avery. He means to take what's ours." Avery swallowed hard, her mind racing. "We can't just wait here." She moved toward the door, but Frank's hand shot out to stop her. "I'm not letting you go out there," he said, his voice firm. "You need to stay put. This ain't the place for you tonight." Avery's breath hitched, frustration rising in her chest. She hated feeling powerless, but Frank's eyes told her there was no reasoning with him. "I know you're scared," he continued, his voice softening, "but Matt's got this. He's ready for whatever Westbrook throws at him. We just need to hold steady here." Avery nodded reluctantly, her heart heavy with fear. "Then we wait. But if he doesn't come back, Frank, you have to promise me you won't just sit by and watch." Frank gave her a hard look, the weight of the situation not lost on him. "I won't," he said simply, but the unspoken promise between them was clear. Matt stayed low, moving with calculated steps as he circled the riders. He had the advantage of the storm and the cover of the trees, but he knew the odds were against him. It was never easy taking on men like Charles Westbrook. They weren't afraid of the fight. They thrived in it. His fingers gripped the rifle tighter as he took another step, keeping his breathing slow and steady. He could hear their voices now, muffled by the snowstorm, but he knew they were close. He had to act fast. Westbrook's voice broke through the howling wind. "Matt Keller," he called out, his voice carrying with unsettling calmness. "I know you're out there. You can't hide forever." Matt froze, his pulse quickening as he heard the taunt. He had hoped to stay hidden just a little longer, but the game was up. He steadied himself, drawing a deep breath before stepping from behind the tree. The crunch of snow beneath his boots was the only sound that broke the silence. He squared his shoulders, ready for what was to come. Westbrook's eyes locked onto him, a wicked smile tugging at his lips. The others were behind him now, a mix of hardened men, each one more dangerous than the last. Matt counted 5 in total. "You always were stubborn, Matt," Westbrook said, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his gun. "But I'm afraid this ends tonight. I've waited long enough." Matt's voice was low but firm as he answered, "You won't take this land, Charles. Not while I'm still breathing." A tense silence fell between them, the wind swirling around them, carrying with it the promise of a deadly confrontation. But it was clear that Westbrook had no intention of backing down. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, though neither of them had expected it to happen this way, in the midst of a snowstorm with their families' futures hanging in the balance. "You can't protect your wife forever, Keller," Westbrook sneered. "I've got men who will make sure of that." Matt's jaw clenched, his fingers wrapping tighter around the rifle. He wasn't about to let Westbrook hurt Avery or anyone else he loved. In a flash, the situation exploded. Shots rang out, echoing over the ridge like thunder. Matt's instincts kicked in. He dove behind a snowdrift, taking cover as bullets whizzed past him, spraying snow in all directions. His heart was hammering, but his mind was clear. He'd been in battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting his family, his home. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it started, and Matt peeked out from behind the snowdrift. He saw the men moving, scattering in the snow, but Westbrook was still standing, his eyes wild with anger. Matt could see it now. This wasn't just a fight for land. This was personal, and he would make sure it was a fight Westbrook would never forget. Avery's pulse raced in her chest as the sounds of gunfire pierced the night. She jumped at the sudden explosion of noise, her breath catching in her throat. Frank moved swiftly, his hand on the door handle, his eyes focused and determined. "Stay inside. I mean it, Avery. Wait for Matt." But she couldn't stay inside. Not now. The fight for their home had begun in earnest, and nothing would stop Matt Keller from defending the family he loved. The wind whipped through the trees as Matt crouched low behind the snowdrift, his rifle trained on Westbrook and his men. The snow, now falling heavily, seemed to mute the world, but in Matt's mind, it was as if the whole world had come alive with danger. His heart pounded in his ears as he waited for the next move. Charles Westbrook had underestimated him before, and Matt wasn't about to let that happen again. He knew the land better than anyone, knew how to use the terrain to his advantage. But this time, it wasn't just the land he had to defend. It was everything that mattered to him. Avery, their son, the future they had worked so hard to build. "Matt Keller," Westbrook's voice called again, loud and mocking, though his voice had a tremor of frustration now. "You've always been a stubborn fool. You won't win this." But Matt didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to show that he was ready, that he wasn't backing down. Westbrook's men had spread out, taking cover behind rocks and trees. Matt could see their shapes in the blur of snow, but they were hard to pin down in the storm. Still, he was prepared. This wasn't his first fight, and it wouldn't be his last. A sudden shout broke through the storm, and Matt whipped his rifle up just in time to see one of the men charge toward him from the right. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger, the sound of the shot deafening against the howl of the wind. The man dropped, his body crumpling into the snow with a sickening thud. But that wasn't the end. That was only the beginning. Another shot rang out, this time from Westbrook. Matt barely ducked in time as a bullet whizzed past him, striking the tree behind him with a splintering crack. Matt quickly rolled to the side, using the momentum to get closer to the other group of riders. His mind raced, calculating each move, each shot. He had to keep them from getting closer to the house. He couldn't let them get any closer to Avery. Avery stood by the door, her heart thumping wildly in her chest. The sound of gunfire rang out again, and she instinctively moved toward the back of the cabin, staying low to the ground. Frank was at the window now, his face grim as he scanned the storm. He hadn't said anything, but Avery knew he was preparing for the worst. They both were. What if something happens to him? Avery whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't help it. The fear that had been growing in her chest since the first shot had been fired was overwhelming. Frank didn't answer immediately, but when he did, his voice was steady, calm. Matt's a fighter. He won't let them take this from him, or from you. Avery nodded, though she didn't feel the calm Frank was trying to instill. The storm outside wasn't just weather anymore. It was a battle, one that was coming closer to home, literally. She couldn't stay inside, not when everything she loved was out there. Without another word, she moved swiftly toward the door. Frank tried to stop her, but she shoved past him, determination in her eyes. "I'm not staying here, Frank. I'm going to find Matt." Frank opened his mouth to protest, but before he could stop her, Avery had already stepped outside, her boots crunching loudly in the snow as she made her way toward the barn. She knew Matt would want to protect her from this danger, but she wasn't going to sit idly by and wait. She had her own fight to face. Matt moved through the trees with a fluid grace, each step taking him closer to the remaining riders. His heart was in his throat as he saw one of Westbrook's men preparing to take another shot. His rifle raised, but Matt was quicker. The crack of his rifle filled the air again, and the man dropped, collapsing face first into the snow. That left just two men. Matt's breath came in quick bursts now, his mind alert, calculating. He could hear them moving toward him, trying to flank him, trying to get him from both sides. But Matt had been through worse. He had faced danger in ways most men couldn't imagine, and he knew what it took to win. With another shot, he took down one more rider, and then it was just him and Charles Westbrook. The last of the snow fell heavily between them as they stood facing each other in the clearing. Matt could see the rage in Westbrook's eyes, the greed that had driven this man for so long. He could see the desperation, the need to win at all costs. "You're a dead man, Keller," Westbrook spat, his voice cold and low. Matt didn't respond. He didn't need to. His finger tightened on the trigger, the moment of silence between them stretched tight. Then, with a deafening crack, Matt fired. Westbrook dropped to his knees, clutching his side. His eyes went wide with shock, but it was too late. Matt had won. The storm raged around them, but in that moment, the world stood still. Matt exhaled slowly, his heart pounding as he looked down at the man who had threatened everything he held dear. Westbrook was done. Avery reached the edge of the barn just as the sounds of gunfire died down. She moved cautiously now, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew Matt would be close. She could feel it, the pull of danger and love intertwined. She stepped into the barn and found Frank standing by the door, his face drawn, his eyes scanning the trees outside. She moved toward him, her breath coming fast. "It's over," Frank said quietly, his voice strained. Avery nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't won completely yet. As the last of the storm passed and the night settled into an eerie stillness, Matt appeared through the trees, bloodied but alive. Avery rushed toward him, her legs weak beneath her as she threw herself into his arms. "You're okay," she breathed, holding him tight. "You're okay." Matt kissed her forehead, his hand running through her hair as he pulled her close. "We're okay," he whispered. "It's over." And for the first time in days, Avery allowed herself to believe him. For the first time in days, she let herself feel the weight of the relief that flooded through her. The storm had passed, but the damage had been done. The battle for their land had been fought, and they had won. But now, the real work began. Rebuilding, not just the house, but the life they had been fighting for. The next morning, Matt and Avery stood side by side, looking out over the ranch. The snow had settled, the wind had calmed, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. Matt took Avery's hand in his fingers warm against her cold skin. "We'll rebuild, together," he said quietly, as though the very idea of losing wasn't possible anymore. Avery squeezed his hand, her heart full. Together. And as they stood there, looking out over the ranch that had been fought for, the world seemed to shift, settling into something new, a future that, despite everything, was theirs. Days turned into weeks, and the hard work of rebuilding began. The scars of the past were still fresh, but Matt and Avery knew that they had already survived the hardest part. Now it was about securing their future, protecting the land they loved, and raising their son in the home they had fought so hard to keep. As the months passed, the ranch slowly came back to life. The barn was repaired, the fences fixed, and the cattle once again roamed the land that had been so violently threatened. And in the evenings, as the sun set behind the mountains, Matt and Avery sat together, watching their son grow and laugh and run through the fields. There was peace in their hearts now, a peace that had come from knowing that no matter what, they would always stand together. Together. That was the greatest victory of all. And if you're captivated by America's past, the untamed Wild West, or inspiring tales of faith, redemption, and love, then you're in for a treat. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe to BigBites and Brews for more legendary frontier stories.